We are joined by none other than the big boss man, the best Bitcoin historian out there in the world. You know him as Pete Rizzo. I call him Daddy Pete. What is up, sir?
I have never heard you call me that, but it's a breath of fresh air. I heartily endorse it, and yeah, I'm glad to be on the stream today. You guys are bringing the energy, and I'll try to keep up.
Hey man, you have ignored my requests for months now, so I'm very pleased to get to have this conversation with you.
Well, yeah, you finally found a talking point that really got me riled up. Yeah, I think a lot of people are very bearish lately on this topic of Bitcoin cycles. People sort of ready to abandon all historical trends and flee for the woods. And yeah, I don't know. I staunchly oppose that. So to the extent that you guys have a platform, I was raring to go.
Yeah. So use our platform. I mean, you've laid it out there very simply. Many people out there do not believe in the 4-year cycle anymore. You, the biggest bear in the Bitcoin space for quite possibly the last 6 months.
Yeah.
Easily called the bear market before anyone else did. I will give you full credit for that.
Yeah. Yeah, the thing is that there wasn't a special insight there. It's just that I appreciated that the Bitcoin market is cyclical. So let's just wind it all the way back, right? Okay, let's talk about you mentioned the context. People have sort of thrown away all this kind of high price history and knowledge. And, I would just say that, it doesn't take a rocket scientist to kind of see what's happening here, right? With the Bitcoin prices has largely followed a very historic, repeatable pattern, right? Is that to say that will always be the case? Maybe not. But I think if you're saying that, you sort of have to remember what it is you're arguing, right? So when we say Bitcoin cycles, what do we mean? We're talking about, patterns in the price over time, right? And we're not, I think when people get tripped up on cycles is they often try to pin it down to very hard specifics, right? They try to say, okay, well, it's got to meet this data point and this criteria within a certain amount of time. And I think really what I want to push for in this conversation is just a more general attitude towards cycles, right? I think the whole stock to flow model, and there's been a ton of people on Twitter kind of now stamping their feet about this, this idea that we can predict the cycles, right? That we can actually mathematically guarantee that Bitcoin will behave a certain way. That can be wrong, right? And then it can still also be true that Bitcoin is cyclical. And again, my argument is that Bitcoin has to be, because if you are arguing that Bitcoin is not cyclical, you're really arguing that the Bitcoin monetary policy doesn't matter, right? You're saying that, because Bitcoin programmatically has its halvings, it programmatically reduces the new supply issued, that doesn't matter, that people will not coordinate around that economically, that they will not coordinate around that opportunistically. And my argument is that they have, right? That this is a repeatable pattern. We've seen 3 halving cycles now, and the pattern of human economic behavior around these cycles has been largely the same, right? Does that mean that your favorite influencer on Twitter, their specific projections for Bitcoin's behavior within that pattern have been correct? No. But there's still a pattern here, right? So it's important to just kind of parse everything, right? And in bear markets, it's tempting to kind of just throw everything out, right? So again, I just want to make this delineation. I think it's possible for cycles to exist, and then for them also to not be specific and not something that is quantifiable, right? And I think that's what you're really seeing with the stock to flow model, right? Was it generally something that was interesting? Was it trying to express something that was valuable? I think so, but was it specifically accurate? And is something like that capable of being specifically accurate? I think the answer to that is no. So,
yeah, I mean, I think what you're pointing out is that wherever there are opportunities for people to recognize patterns that are either systemic or for any other reason, they're going to use that knowledge, or as the pattern is developed, they're going to try to, as much as possible, to arbitrage against those. And so those patterns shift over time within the constraints of, as you said, the kind of hard-coded systems that are part of Bitcoin.
Right. I think what people get hung up on is that they know that the halving is going to happen, right? So there's kind of these warring things with markets. It's right. There's one hand, you have Bitcoin and it's programmatic, right? It's mathematically pure. And then there's the other side, you have markets, which are naturally destructive, right? Markets want to break things that people think are true, right? Why did we see the Bitcoin price crack through the 2017 all-time high? Well, because the market offered that up as something that wasn't going to happen, right? So markets like to disprove things, right? So there's this natural tendency of, Bitcoin is programmatic. and because it is mathematical, it has behavior patterns, but then markets are unpredictable, right? So I think that when traditional people from the traditional markets world, they see the halving, they say, oh, that information is priced in because people know it's going to happen, right? Oh, we know that the Bitcoin supply is going to be reduced. So they think that people won't act around that, which is, sort of get into like efficient market hypothesis. So they state that information is baked into the market. My argument is that that's not true, is that that's inaccurate. And because, we know that people behave towards monetary policy changes in other ways, right? So you guys were talking about the Fed before we got on here, right? People coordinate around the Fed. Why do we listen to what the Fed has to say? Because they're providing market information and then people react to it, right? People coordinate around that information. My argument would really be, I think the halvings will continue to be important up until the time when everyone is coordinating around it, right? Because if you are acting on the information of the halving and someone else is not acting on that information, there's an asymmetry, right? So I think that the halving will continue to be impactful. And again, I just worry about this idea that we're starting to say like, oh, well, the halvings won't be impactful. Well, then, so why do you think that the Bitcoin monetary policy matters at all to you then? Right? Like, what's your argument then, for why that would continue to happen, right? So I think, again, breaking them down into parts, I think that they're just separate things, right? It is, I think, possible for Bitcoin halvings to continue to be impactful, for Bitcoin to continue to display cyclical price behavior, but then for that behavior pattern to not be something that we can specifically quantify with a chart or a formula, like stock to flow tried to do, right? Because stock to flow really tried to do something specific. It tried to say that you can always predict the future Bitcoin price based on variables, right? And I think we would agree now, right, that that's inaccurate, right? I think that's been disproven.
Well said. Well said. Q.
I think there's an echo.
Breaking the minds here.
No, I think there's an echo. There's definitely an echo, but I will ask my question. I don't think I'm following you, Pete, because
Sure.
Like I fully believe halving has a legitimate squeeze on the overall supply. I think historically speaking, you can actually measure human psychology based on price action and price movement generally. And we have seen that even transpire within Bitcoin to a degree, maybe not as replicable.
Well, we have, right? There have been 3 bull markets within Bitcoin's history, right, of any significant size, and they've been in 2013, 2017, and 2021. And then the question then sort of becomes, well, why were they exactly 4 years apart? And I think that the answer that is often sort of touted by the economic mainstream is that, well, it's just a random sequence of events, that this is just, total happenstance, right? So I think, again, like there's 2 conflicting things here, that the halvings are happening programmatically, and then there's Bitcoin price peaks that are happening, seemingly in response to that. But then the argument that I think people who argue against Bitcoin cycles get into is that they just, they assert that this is all just random, right? And so how do you really have these things? They obviously conflict, right? You have to have some explanation for why the behavior fits a pattern. And if your best explanation is, oh, well, it's a random occurrence, well, I'm not sure how truthful you're really being, because, obviously the pattern conflicts that, right? It doesn't, when you see something happen with a cyclical reoccurring pattern, right, you have to then explain the pattern in some way, right? And if you're constantly kind of appealing to randomness, I just don't think that works.
So I bought my first Bitcoin in 2019. So I did not enjoy the ride up in 2017 or 2013. We're bearing witness to a lot of people coming out, coming out of the woodworks and saying, oh, well, this decline is because of so much leverage, or this decline is because of this reason or that reason. I'm genuinely curious from a historical perspective of when those bear markets happened after the bull run of 2013 or after the bull run of 2017, what was the general market sentiment? Were there theories being thrown out in the same way we're seeing today?
Yeah, I think that's a good question. There was no conception of a cycle at that point, right? So I think you really have to wind it back, so that certain points in the Bitcoin history, we just had not seen multiple. There's only been 3 halvings, right? So at some point, after 2013, there had only been one halving, right? There had only been one time where the Bitcoin protocol programmatically reduced the amount of Bitcoin that it was issuing, and then that affected the supply, right? So people legitimately did not know what to expect in that environment. And, coming into the bear market in 2014, again, a very comparable time to now, a lot of what you see around, like, when you think about where did the fork wars start, where did kind of the historical battles around Bitcoin begin? Well, a lot of it was this idea that we had to change Bitcoin because we didn't know if it would economically still be viable to continue. There was this kind of fear put out at the time about this mining death spiral, right? Essentially, the Bitcoin price would keep going down. It would become unprofitable to mine. Miners would turn off. Merchants would sort of stop accepting Bitcoin. And there'd be this rapid sort of spiral downward, right? So again, like, I think if you really want to back up and get very meta about this, people have had theories about the Bitcoin price historically. They've changed a lot. I think coming into the last bull market, a lot of new people were presented this idea with cycles, right? This idea that we were displaying and seeing a cyclical pattern, and I think stock to flow, kind of personified that. But in 2013, that was not the case, right? You had a bear market. Nobody really understood why there was a bear market. There had just been this huge explosion of price interest. 2013, price goes up to 1,000, goes down to 200, even though there's all these new businesses, all this press coverage, people couldn't explain it. And there was really no reason to think that Bitcoin was failing and that it wasn't failing. And there was no belief that the halving was going to really have an impact, that Bitcoin's programmatic nature would again kind of, impact the supply. And then, naturally, there'd be a systematic adjustment there. So there was appeal to kind of humans to get involved, right? So I think my own conviction about Bitcoin was very shaped during that time because I did not believe that the halving had any impact, right? And I think coming through that period and seeing that despite all of our efforts to try to change Bitcoin, right, and all these discussions we were having, Bitcoin adjusted, that economics, again, we didn't have, Saif Ad-Din at the time. We didn't have people talking about economics the way we do now, explaining why it's natural for these sort of market cycles to emerge, right? So I think coming out of that period, I became a lot more convinced that the halving was having a pretty significant impact because there was no other way to explain really what happened, right? Why would Bitcoin's price have then gone up in 2017 with everyone fighting about it all the time and constantly trying to change it and, debating all these things, right? So again, I'm not sure where you want to expand on that, but I would say that, there has been different theories at different times. And I think largely there's a binary conflict. And the binary conflict is people who think that the programmatic nature of Bitcoin makes it there's a distinct economic phenomenon that's occurring here. That's camp one. And I think camp two is largely like it's a bunch of random human actions like resulting in price. And I think that, where my current temperature of the community is, I think that most people who are Bitcoiners, I think, we think of Bitcoin as an economic phenomena, that it is displaying sort of a cyclical price activity. And then I think the more you end up into like thinking that human action or, human behavior dictates Bitcoin price, like meaningfully, like in a cyclical way, then I think the more you end up in this other camp, which just sort of thinks that like, it's us human beings who are periodically driving the Bitcoin price up and our own actions and our own randomness. That was a lot.
There's a degree of this human randomness that can actually be calculated. Like you can, again, using historical examples, like human psychology has not changed. Our environment has. So
it's a little bit because I think the psychological point that people make is that, again, so if you think that the halving is priced in, I think what you're really saying is that like people understand Bitcoin and they understand what the halving is. So when you're saying psychology here, it's like, I agree with you that psychology matters, but then you have to remember the psychology of the participants, right? Like just because you know about Bitcoin, just because you're trading Bitcoin doesn't mean you understand anything about it, right? Doesn't mean you actually believe the same things as other market participants. So that's where I would just draw a little line there.
I accept that. I would also agree that to a degree, at least on the retail side of Bitcoin investors or speculators, or however we want to define that group, no, they have no technological understanding of Bitcoin. Like I'll admit, I was in Bitcoin for a whole year before I even understood what the halving was. And that wasn't what I was necessarily concerned about. So I do kind of, to a degree, understand how and why. Like I'm frankly in the camp of the reason Bitcoin is moving the way it's moving is it is just being traded by a bunch of hedge fund managers, and they are trading it no different than they would just trade a QQQ sort of position in their portfolio. They've calculated their own beta, and they have to reallocate from 0.5% to 2.5% allocation in their portfolio based on price levels and market volatility as a whole.
Mm-hmm.
But so that thesis though removes leverage, which I do actually also believe has a general impact, ignoring halving, ignoring general supply, and ignoring.
Well, that's why I would say I think the little thing, the naivete in stock to flow, is that it sort of assumed that you could quantify the Bitcoin like economy's behavior, and then it would respond to the natural to the world, like the US dollar price, without taking into account that environment too was changing, right? So I think that I want to encourage people to continue thinking about cycles, because I do think there's something to this, right? There's not nothing here, is my point. There's enough conflicting information where we should want to strive to continue understanding this. And I think one thing that's likely plausible is that the halving is real. It works. That is what makes the economy cyclical. But then you've had a couple of halvings.
Sorry, Pete, can you describe the halving just for our audience?
Sure. So every 4 years, the Bitcoin protocol just programmatically reduces the amount of new Bitcoin that is issued in the supply every 10 minutes when miners find new Bitcoin, right? So essentially, right now, every 10 minutes, a miner is being rewarded on average 6.25 Bitcoin or 6.5 Bitcoin, can't remember. And in the next halving cycle, that will reduce to 3.25 Bitcoin, right? So again, Bitcoin programmatically adjusts its monetary policy. So very similar to what you would see with like the Fed changing its rates, right? Like there's a change in how money enters the economy and how the economy functions. So two of those halvings, like the 13 halving and the 2017 halving, have happened during times where the traditional monetary environment was very strong, right? Like there were strong economies where people had a lot of money, they were buying and selling a lot of things. I think now, since we've entered into 2020, it's like very clear we're in a more weaker, uncertain economy, right? So again, I think like one of the errors that I'm starting to suspect here with stock to flow is not that it wasn't directionally correct, that there isn't a relationship to Bitcoin scarcity over time, and it's just that Bitcoin scarcity over time is not a linear mappable. It's one component of a larger puzzle, and another equal component is just the attitude of the general economy, which is where people are coming from, right? So, one of the reasons I think you saw this recent market crash is, sentiment about the regular economy, the traditional economy, is very bad. People think the United States economy is entering a recession. People think that this was the same case in 2020, right? When Bitcoin double tested the bottom, low of 3,000, right? People, it was back around 10,000 to start 2020, went back to 3,000, because of the macro uncertainty. So I guess what I would say here is that, again, stock to flow, what was it trying to say? It was trying to say that there's a relationship between Bitcoin scarcity and time. Pretty, I think, inarguably at this point, like that seems to be the case. And then, can you specifically plot that in some chart and then publish it for people, and can it be correct? And I think the answer to that is no, right? Like that is also a failed effort. But just because that specific effort fails doesn't mean that the underlying insight is invalid. So if you're looking at what happened with Plan B in a stock to flow model, and like you're saying, let's throw all of this out, I think that's probably a bad idea. Don't do that. Because some of it is based on things that we have learned that are still fundamentally correct, even if that model is just entirely broken, right?
Q, I know that in your heart of hearts, you're like, that's fucking right. I told you. I have been railing at Q for arguing that the stock to flow model still has stuff to teach us. And Rizzo, I think you just settled that argument.
Well, on whose side? I mean, I think it does have some. I mean, again, it's saying something that is fundamentally, I think, more correct than wrong, right?
There's a lot of leeway in there.
But again, I think you have to remember where we're coming from, right? So Bitcoin is a phenomena, and again, I always use this language because I think it's the right way to look at it. It is something that is occurring like a tornado or a storm. It's an independent event. None of us control it. I don't control Bitcoin. You don't control Bitcoin. It is occurring in real time, and then you have to develop hypotheses about it, right? You have to then describe what you are seeing. So I think the task is that, like, you can't look at the Bitcoin price and say that it has not been cyclical. It arguably has. So again, I think, like, just thinking about what to throw out here, it's like we need to build from that base and then go from there. But we do have lost a bunch of stuff. We have a lot of new data to evaluate.
So I just want to fully reiterate that Papa Pete is on Team Q.
No, fuck that. I take my own conclusions
what would
from
be
what
your
you just
counter
said.
argument? So like I think the counter argument again is this appeal to this like random walk and like randomness, where it's like, okay, well, there just shouldn't be any way to quantify this, and it's all just random human action.
No, I think basically I think that there was kind of a religious fervor that was associated with the stock to flow model, and
Oh, sure,
I agree with
yeah.
you. Like it was very much correct directionally, right? But that's the direction being like up and to the right, and so I think that we've seen a pattern of a number of different, very closely held kind of sacred cows in the Bitcoin space be as they I think honestly should be, like tested and then taken out to pasture and taken out, right? Like
but again, I think it's important to say then, okay, then what are we throwing out? And again, I think that what I'm proposing here is, I think specifically we should throw out this idea that we can calculate this, and that you can mathematically determine
exactly
how Bitcoin's price will respond. Because again, I think this stems from like this idea that Bitcoin is mathematical, and therefore you should be able to then determine with strong precision what the price output is based on the scarcity and time and things like that. I think that is super inaccurate. But I do think that what we'll find is that the halving and the monetary policy changes of Bitcoin will continue to be impactful. People will still coordinate around that to their economic benefit. And because of that, Bitcoin will still display a cyclical behavior. So my argument here is a bit of a return to the mean, where I fully expect sometime after the halving for Bitcoin's price to again go into a recovery phase. Because if you don't expect that to happen, what you're saying is that the monetary policy of Bitcoin doesn't matter. It doesn't matter that the halvings are occurring. It doesn't matter that is happening. So I'm entering a loose framework for the next cycle and how I'm thinking about it, which is, I think I'm thinking about it as long as we continue kind of in a sideways downtrend until the next halving. And then as long as thereafter, people coordinate around that change for their economic benefit in a way that increases the Bitcoin price over time, then I think the halving still works and Bitcoin is still cyclical. That natural relationship is still intact. So I was talking to Pierre Richard about this, a few days ago, and he was saying, okay, like, accepting that premise, when would your thesis be invalid? And so I said, if we saw any time between now and before the halving that Bitcoin sets a new all-time high, I agree. I fully agree that cycle theory is dead. But again, accepting that we've seen this pattern 3 times and it happens a fourth time that there's recovery after the halving. Now you're going to tell me that there's 4 times, because again, you have to remember that, look, say you're somebody who's been working on Ethereum. You are thoroughly convinced that each of these cycles have been the product of your own invention. In 2017, it was the ICOs. They were so smart, they made the ICOs and the whole market recovered because of the ICOs. And in 2021, it was the NFTs and the DAOs. They were so smart, they came up with these smart things and the whole cryptocurrency economy blossoms, right? So you do have these things do matter, because they influence perceptions all around and everybody within the wider cryptocurrency space, right? So then the argument that I would give to that crowd is that their opinions are irrational. What they are witnessing is the cyclical pattern of Bitcoin's price activity propelling the whole market. And then they are deluding themselves into thinking that their human efforts are actually the products of that market activity. And I think that Bitcoiners sometimes fall into the same pattern, right? Of thinking, oh, okay, well, what?
Oh, I'm totally joking. Yes, you're absolutely correct.
Okay, well, I don't know what to believe.
God damn it, P, shut up.
I killed your train of thought, Pete. I'm sorry.
You didn't, but I think what I'm saying is that you have to have a thesis. It's like, what is it? You gotta pick something here, right? So if you hate stock to flow, great, but then explain to me how, generally speaking, we've been able to, again, we can plan. And I get this was my foray into thinking that Bitcoin was, again, the economics of it were becoming very interesting. Is I can plan around Bitcoin. If I can plan around Bitcoin, I can coordinate my own economic interests around it. Great, that's awesome. That seems like a great thing that we've created. So I think that just because we don't now have the mathematical certainty of a specific predictive model, this does not mean that nothing has been gained here, right? I still think we have to look at what's happening. We have to respect the phenomena that's occurring, continue to try to define it, but look, this whole thing is not completely wrong, right? Otherwise, we have to have an explanation for these things, right? So what is your explanation for why this history has occurred that way, if that is what you believe?
P, he's asking you because I believe in stock to flow still.
Wait. I think believing in the 4-year cycle and the specifics of the stock to flow model are two different things. I 100% believe in the 4-year cycle. The thing that I was pushing back on is the kind of religious fervor that was associated
I think
with
stock to flow is definitely a huge problem, and I think we shouldn't go down that road again. But I think even like the 4-year cycle. So again, what people don't understand here is that there's the scientific aspect of how Bitcoin functions, which again is scientific, and then there's the market, right? So the market is, anytime you define something, the market is going to test it. So when you're saying, oh, it's a 4-year cycle now, oh, well, then the market's going to try to break that, and I would argue that I think it tried to this time, right? That's why you saw the double top, right? There are people who are betting against that. So anytime a market sees that you hold some belief, it will try to break that belief and then see what happens. So, again, my only claim here is that Bitcoin is cyclical. I'm not even saying it's 4-year cyclical, and I'm not even saying that that stock to flow is correct, right? I'm throwing all that out. What I'm saying is, like, I'm going to hold the loosest possible claim, and then hold to that, because I fundamentally do still think that the markets will try to break our beliefs, and that what we're seeing right now is the institutions are they're trying to play us. They know that they can predict our patterns. They know we're saying all this information, and then they know they can bet against us. Right. That's, I think, the big thing when you're talking about institutions are coming in. Well, what are they doing? They're trying to destroy all your beliefs and take all your Bitcoin. I mean, that's it. I mean, your worst conspiracy theories are probably accurate. I mean, there's someone from Goldman right now who's like on this call, and they're saying, I want to put the Bitcoin that's in Q's pocket and put it in my pocket. And if I do these acts, if I break all of his beliefs, then that will happen. Right. So the people who just sold your Bitcoin, you just sold at the low. I think that's what happened to you. Bitcoin Tina will talk to you all day about, you sold it to Wall Street.
You can come and get to the person at Goldman watching this who's salivating over my Bitcoin. You could come pry it out of my cold, dead hands. But also, wow. I mean, I want to talk on this double top, which you've brought up, as well as the undercutting of the previous cycle high. And then there's a third component of the sort of what I and many Bitcoiners kind of bought into, I think, where you get a cyclical nature of Bitcoin. And if you buy and hold for a predetermined amount of time, you're inevitably up. And that number, we've lost Rizzo's still there. That number, sometimes gets thrown around. If you hold for 4 years, you've never been down. If you hold for 5 years, you've never been down.
Yeah, I think again, I think this is going to be the nature of Bitcoin. It's fundamentally, I think it's going to be correct that Bitcoin will continue to go up as the user base expands, and the user base expands over time. But I think any attempts that we have to quantify this are going to be rigorously attacked. And again, that's why I think you want to be really careful about which beliefs that you're having. Right? Like what beliefs do you hold sacred? Right? Because I think the more that you hold a belief sacred, the more that it opens it up to attack. Right? Somebody's just gonna blow that up. Right? So if you think that there's a way for you to hold Bitcoin and make money, long term, do I think that's true? Obviously, I'm not gonna sit here and recommend that people do anything other than buy Bitcoin and hold. But if you in your mind like have such a strong correlation between a specific year, I think you're gonna have a really hard time with that. It's just never going to work out, right? The more that you define it, the more the market is going to exist to attack that definition that you just made, because that's what it wants to do, right? So you're like, oh, it'll never fall between the 2017 high. Well, it did. It'll probably go lower from here, right? And maybe not this year, maybe next year, but the market will continue to test your resolve, right? So just make sure you think very critically about what beliefs you hold, right?
I love that. I think I've just been sort of enjoying trying to imagine like what's the next sacred cow that people are going to like anchor to, like I think it's going to be like, I mean, Bitcoin never goes below the last cycle low. I mean,
yeah, right. Like all these things are like ridiculous.
Yeah, exactly. One thing that I would love to go through with you is just sort of a quick, greatest hits reel of like, what are those sacred cows? What are the kind of like, whether it's like the models, the specific beliefs, like what have we currently just blown through so far? What is still intact?
What are the sacred cows that have been debunked at this point? I guess I have this thesis that I can share that's a bit like the dragons, right? So Bitcoin early in its history, it sort of had all these dragons around it, and then I think it has slayed a good majority of them. So I'm trying to think if I can remember like all the specific ones. But so one of them would have been like the idea that a Bitcoin forking, would destroy Bitcoin, or that Bitcoin couldn't survive that, right? So you had technology risk was a big dragon. Like, right, what would happen if a sizable portion of the community forked the code? And the answer is that the people who forked the code away from Bitcoin, all their Bitcoin is now worthless, right? So that dragon was slayed, but for a long time, it was a big dragon that a lot of people were scared about, right? I think the next one prior to that is if you go back to this idea of the mining death spiral, this idea that like if the price kept declining, people wouldn't keep mining, which again, it's like if you think about that really critically, it's that you just believe that people wouldn't act opportunistically and then mine Bitcoin because it would be valuable in the future. People thought that miners would be way too specific about their electricity costs and that they were really mining to get dollars. And I think a lot of that has really been invalidated. I think if you go back before that, there was the bans, right? China ban in 2013, that a government ban would be really bad for Bitcoin, which was invalidated. And so I guess maybe that's a loose greatest hits, right? Those were the, that the altcoin boom would kill Bitcoin, right? There'd be a million alts and then Bitcoin would be irrelevant. Was also kind of an early dragon. I think that there's a couple dragons left, and I had a recent convo with American Hodl who you guys had on. And I think I identified 2 dragons that I think are still remain. So I think my confidence, I like to say this recently, it's a good line that I've been developing, but I think every day I try to actively decrease my confidence in Bitcoin, and I find that my confidence in Bitcoin only increases. So that's good. But yeah, I think there's two dragons left probably.
And they are
obviously the rainbow chart,
like
rock solid.
Rizzo, you can't just say that and be like, oh, I'm not going to tell you that. I wanted to
leave it at that. I was just hoping you'd change the subject after that. Yeah.
No, fuck that.
Okay. All right. Well, I guess I'll say them now. Yeah. So I think one of the first big dragon is who gets to claim that a software is Bitcoin Core, or like the official Bitcoin Core software. I think this comes across every time there's like a discussion of a hard fork or soft fork, and can updates only occur through the Bitcoin Core process, right? Do the users only validate technical consensus? That's a very complicated one. We've come up to it a couple times, both around Taproot. You had to really be paying attention to notice it. But I do think it's a really thorny dragon. It's essentially, who gets to claim that a software is Bitcoin? Is it the process that defines that, or is it the users who defines it? Could potentially get very ugly if it ever comes down to that. The fork wars are bad, but explaining that would be much more. And then the other one is just really obviously 2140, right? At some point, there'll be no new Bitcoins issued by the protocol. And so, how does the Bitcoin economy and how does Bitcoin continue to function, thereafter, right? So I think one of those we won't see, right? We won't see 2140. So you might live to see maybe one more Bitcoin dragon, I think. And then, maybe the cycle thing. I think the cycle thing could be a drag. I think enough people believe in cycles, and maybe there's enough. I hadn't really previously thought of that as a dragon because I believe in the cycles, but maybe I believe in them so much that they're a dragon.
I don't know, man. You've been scarily accurate so far. It's very frustrating for me personally. I mean, you've been like, guys, only this much longer in this bull market, and everybody's like, you fucking bear.
I mean, I think the most personally validating one was Odell. He was really not happy with me for a good amount of time. But look, I mean, I don't know. It's just not hard. I mean, people, the retail sentiment comes in, and then everybody gets super excited, and then. Look, it's still early, right? People say, "Oh, it's early." Well, it's early. Yeah, it's very early. The confidence in Bitcoin. The most of the world doesn't understand what Bitcoin is, right? So they get scared and they sell it, and you thought you wouldn't see 20K again, and here we are. Is it 20? Are we still over 20K? Like, what is the price? What is even the price right now?
I stacked a little under 20K before the stream, but I also think that during the stream it's gone above 20. Yeah,
the people heard you.
I will say I'm very happy with that tweet from the Bitcoin Magazine account. What if this is the dip that you've been waiting for? Yeah. Maybe going on down as an iconic tweet. But Dylan LeClaire, very bearish on that.
I mean, I'll be fully transparent. I mean, sex symbol Dylan LeClaire will be joining the stream in about 1 hour. But before,
the markets will definitely go up. Yeah, from that.
Well, I will be completely honest in that I take all of my trading advice now from Pete Rizzo. So there is that.
It's a nice perk of being in the Bitcoin Magazine Slack channels is you get the free alpha of But again, I'm not I think it's people have especially new people I think struggle with this idea that you can be bearish on Bitcoin within the still context of being bullish on Bitcoin, and I think that's also a stupid thing. Don't do that. You don't have to be a stupid permabull all the time. I mean, Bitcoin's great, and we all need to make it successful, but it's okay to be rational about things, right? The Get on Zero crowd, I think, was super irresponsible. That was just a very irresponsible thing to advocate for people to do, because you can't really speak to people's specific economic situations, right? You don't know what's going on in their lives, and I think Bitcoin at best is going to be a tool for economic calculation. It's a tool that you can rely on personally and you can use for your own economic benefit and judgments. And there is a cyclicality to Bitcoin. I think that is obvious based on its history. Personally, I have used that for my own financial benefit as a Bitcoin buyer. And I would expect that to continue. And I worry what would happen if that becomes not true. If Bitcoin is just, no longer has a cyclical pattern that you can coordinate around, because if you can't coordinate around Bitcoin, then I think Bitcoin starts to look a lot like everything else, right? Where you really can't coordinate around it, right? So if you were talking about the Fed and why market manipulation is bad and why it's bad to have a central bank, well, it's because everyone is hanging on the words of these 10 old people who are telling you what the price of money is, right? And so what does that mean is that people can't coordinate organically around the price of money in the market, right? So if you're moving into the Bitcoin world, that would seem to be the thing that you're protesting against, right? You're saying, no, we want to have programmatic certainty on that, right? And if Bitcoin starts to undermine that guarantee, I would worry a little bit, because I think, again, it exists to contrast the existing system in which you cannot coordinate. You do not know what the Federal Reserve is going to do within the next 6 to 12 months. So your ability to coordinate around that is impossible. Bitcoin does not have that problem. That's the benefit, right?
I buy half of that. You can't coordinate 6 months out because the Fed literally has changed 6 months out, 6 months out numerous times now. But you can predict maybe 2 months in advance or a month and a half in advance in particular. The 75 basis point hike was a shock. However, it wasn't. It was premeditated by 2 days. The Fed leaked it to the Wall Street Journal over the weekend. And you also saw the market, frankly, begging for it. So I do think
so?
Well, because
but can we all admit that that's super dumb and we shouldn't, as a society,
absolutely.
I certainly I'm not saying I'm pro this system. I'm just saying
they got to keep the music going.
No, look.
But that seems to be the thing that Bitcoin is protesting against, right? So you get in what does the Bitcoin technology do specifically? It allows you not to participate in that. That's the primary benefit.
I'm curious. I gotta stop just saying I'm curious. It's honestly, it gets on my nerves, and I say it all the time. But we're starting to see inflation play out across currencies, and for those who I think pay closer attention to it, the theory is, well, the U.S.'s currency is inflating and everyone else is inflating worse. It's because they have it tied to the U.S. dollar.
I think the inflation argument for Bitcoin is dumb. I've always hated it.
Well,
I don't think it actually
wasn't where I was going with it. Let me finish my thought. I know you're my boss, but let me finish my thought.
Wait, then I want to come back to that because I want to hear you rail against the inflation argument.
What effect overall could this like growing inflation have on just people's ability to go and buy Bitcoin? Because ultimately, Bitcoin's price, we measure it in America in USD. In Canada, they measure it to Canadian dollars. So there is this degree of, it still goes back to fiat for now. And what effect does this growing inflation have? Because that's like, we can talk all we want about a recession, this, that, or the other, but this level of inflation on a global scale, we've never seen. Let alone
I'm a bit of in the camp of like the like not really being in the super Austrian camp of like inflation is, you know, bad. I mean, it's bad now that you have a system like Bitcoin that competes against it, because Bitcoin doesn't offer a system like that. But I think for a while it was probably a well-intentioned way to run an economy, because again, like if you're running an economy like the size of the United States, inflation essentially offers you the way to socialize your loss over a larger amount of time, right? So like gas is going up and everything is expensive now, but also everything didn't crash in the pandemic, and your business, the business that you worked for, didn't go under, and nobody took your house. So I think when you're looking at inflation, you have to remember that the trade-offs, right? So the trade-offs is the United States printed a lot of money. It printed a lot of money to amortize the costs over time for paying for the economy, for people to continue to live at their current levels during the pandemic. And now you are paying inflated costs in order to do that, right? Like that is the current cost is now baked in over time, right? So if you look at that from like that trade-off perspective, why would you not, like if you're running the US economy, that just obviously seemed like a good thing to do, right? But as a human being who exists and lives between both the US economy and the Bitcoin economy, you can coordinate to your advantage between them, right? So I would say, you know, when people make arguments about Bitcoin being an inflation refuge, that is what they're saying. But again, I still don't think that the people within that are operating the systems, they don't have any incentive to stop doing any of these things. Like if that's what you think, I don't know what to say, because they're going to keep doing all these things, because there's a very good intellectual basis for them to continue doing it within their world, right, where Bitcoin doesn't exist and it's useless, and your ability to use Bitcoin doesn't matter. But it's the conflict of those two systems, right? And I think that's what we're trying to describe. And we're trying to describe it very poorly, right? We're saying, oh, well, the inflation is going up, so therefore people are going to flock to Bitcoin. Well, it's like, I don't know. You know, I read that piece from Bitcoin Magazine, and you know, you talk about and what's going on in Lebanon right now, and you know, if you're a Bitcoiner in Lebanon, you don't have a bank. Your money is frozen in the bank that the government nationalized, and you are buying Tether from somebody on the street, sending that to an exchange, and then buying Bitcoin with it, if you're buying Bitcoin. And that's just the reality of what they're doing, right? So like, even if you're a hodler there, because who's going to sell Bitcoin to them? Like no one's going to, if you're a Bitcoiner, you're not selling Bitcoin. So you're not buying Bitcoin on the street. So, you know, and even they, when I talk to them, they're like, yeah, like Lebanon as an economy is not going to embrace Bitcoin, right? There's no reason for people to give up their monetary approach here. I can use it as a personal escape from this, you know, rapid inflation here. But I don't know, right? I think, again, these are just data points that we have to figure out a way to move forward. And I think it's tempting to rely on memes and try to condense this information to memes, right? And the inflation meme of like, oh, inflation bad, Bitcoin good. It just doesn't, you know, there's no information being conveyed there.
Like may or may not have been screaming that from the rooftops for the last 9 months. So,
but like learn from that. That's fine. I mean, like nobody's gonna like. I don't think anyone's gonna hold it. There were a lot of people who were, right. Like there were a lot of people who were making that argument. But I think, you know, I think a lot of this happens with Bitcoin memes, where it's like, is there something authentically true about that? Right. Yes. In Bitcoin, your currency cannot be debased. that is true. And like in the traditional economy, your currency is and often is debased with the express claim that is for your benefit that is occurring. And it's likely we're living in some period of time where those both of those systems are going to coexist. And there's no reason that one of them has to straight out compete the other on those grounds, right? I hope that people more keep finding Bitcoin useful, that we make the Bitcoin ecosystem more useful because it has these monetary advantages, so therefore people get those monetary advantages. But we still have to do that. We have to onboard them to the system, right? So I think there's a bit of a false choice with the inflation bad Bitcoin good thing, is that it pushes the onus on the world to like push people to Bitcoin. And I think people like it so much because it gives them the conviction that they can do nothing and that Bitcoin will be successful. And I think ultimately that is what's so bad about that narrative and like so incredibly harmful about it, is it creates you as the recipient of that information. It creates the understanding in your mind that you can do absolutely nothing to benefit Bitcoin as a human being and still profit from it at the expense of other people. And if you think that a narrative like that is good, then I don't I don't know what to tell you, because it's you know, it's not it's an irrational position, and it's almost psychotic. Sorry.
How dare you? So I was going to ask, like, so what are some of the things that we haven't yet talked about in this conversation? Like, what are some of the aspects of what's going on right now in the markets, or with Bitcoin specifically, so macro or Bitcoin specifically, that you have been
Well, I
thinking
mean, I think a
about?
lot of these companies are very overexposed to each other, and they're very exposed to lending, and they're very exposed to other cryptocurrencies, right? So if you have Bitcoin and BlockFi, you are still exposed to like the risk that's in this environment, right? So I think that we're certainly learning a lot about how the crypto market operates and how intertwined a lot of these businesses are. I don't think that was clear to me prior to seeing really what happened, where all these things started crashing. Like, I mean, man, if all it takes is one, if Tether can go down, Tether's just one cryptocurrency. I mean, if you think all these cryptocurrencies are worthless, that's just one of them. like that should be frightening to you. that the economy overall is so brittle, right? So I think that was a shock, right? I'm not sure what to say about that, but also at the same time, it's we haven't seen that cascading contagion, right? A lot of the other DeFi products are still operating. The market's still largely intact. I mean, I'm really interested to see, like, and I think this is what the market will test all of those things. So I think that, and I think Bitcoin is, for whatever reason, it's I think Terra increased people's perception of Bitcoin's risk profile, whether fairly or unfairly. And so I think if we start seeing other things fail, because of this continued risk pouring out in the market, Bitcoin's not going to be insulated from that. I don't think there are people who understand the differences well enough.
No, you're absolutely right. I mean, I've certainly experienced that in my own life.
This Mung Beans guy loves me. He's like, I don't know who this guy is, but I'm reading everything.
Shout out the Twitch fam, Mung Beans.
Shout out to Mung Beans.
Yeah, I've certainly experienced it in my own life. Like, I've had people, family members reach out and be like, man, so like this Bitcoin thing, like not doing too well. I'm like, what are you talking about? They're like, well, I heard about Celsius and Terra, like this is bad. I'm like, they're not the same thing. And they're like, wait, what? I don't understand.
Right.
Like,
Yeah. There's just no understanding. Yeah. There's no
understanding. And I think it's super frustrating.
Yeah, but again, like I always go back to it, and the message I like to send to people is like, you have to go forth and build, and we have to continue building the Bitcoin economy, right? And I think this is the trick of bull markets, is they like convince you that it's happening right now. Oh my God, like and that you don't have to do anything. And if you're still here in Bitcoin, there's good reason. Like, we're building something worthwhile. We're building a system that doesn't have any of these awful features of the traditional economy, but like you have to help us get there, right? And with your whatever you can do to help, whether it's building a company, starting a company, moving forward, starting Meetup, you should do that. Bull market's a great time to do that, right? Bear market's a great time to do that. Now is when the things get built that will happen next time around. But look, I said this on the Macroeconomics podcast at the start of the year. It's like I tried to send the message of like, be very careful about the narratives that you fall for, right? Bitcoin has this habit of the price goes up, so we think we're right, and we think the market thinks we're right, and then you just get rugged completely, right? So yeah, you want to be careful of that. I think that every narrative that advances in Bitcoin probably has some truth to it, right? Some part of it is correct, but then at some point it becomes, a parody of itself, and it becomes incorrect. And I think that's what stock to flow, what happened, right? The genesis of the idea, was thoughtful, right? It was that can we quantify this relationship between Bitcoin scarcity and time? If Bitcoin scarcity exists, if it's programmatic, if it's predictable, is there a relationship that we can quantify mathematically? Unfortunately, I think the answer is no, right? Because I think the missing piece of the puzzle is you can't factor for the macroeconomic environment in which people are still taking resources from that economy and investing in our economy. So that's the disconnect. Those things don't match up one to one. But we still, I think should look into this idea of, okay, well, what does Bitcoin scarcity, programmatic scarcity mean? Like, because it still exists, right? There's still some function there, and it still impacts the market in some way. And we need to continue exploring it, right? I'm not sure what the right answer is, but we don't have one right now. Stock free flow. Where is it?
Well, I want to talk about another narrative that we kind of touched on, but we didn't really. And I think this is the one that CNBC, Fox Business, all of these more market-oriented channels really hammer us with. And it was the narrative of, Bitcoin is an inflation hedge.
And we created that. So,
I mean, to a degree, though, it's been, at least in this short-term window, been disproven. But
yeah, it is true accurate. That if you use the Bitcoin currency, no one can debase your currency. But again, we're talking about the conflict between two systems here, both of which are dynamic systems. And again, this was sort of the fallacy of stock to flow. It's the same fallacy that's at the heart of the inflation bad, Bitcoin good thing. It's that there's some way to quantify these relationships that is incredibly specific, and to derive some specific insight from them. They can just be two separate things that you can benefit from based on your action. That is also a plausible, though highly unpopular, third opinion, I would argue. But Bitcoiners do this all the time, right? They do this all the time. If you don't use Bitcoin all the time, then you are arbitraging the two systems, right? And so again, we do live at this time, and we're of, I think, immense privilege in the Bitcoin world, where we can arbitrage the two systems for our benefit. You're going to go out and you're going to probably buy dinner with fiat currency, and then you're going to save in Bitcoin. So you're propagating that part of the system as well, right? So yeah, I think we still have to think pretty meaningfully about that, right? There's a weird behavior that we all have.
Do you think then, without a circular economy, without the consistent inflow and outflow of Bitcoin from one individual to another, that is preventing, I want to start first on price. Is that preventing Bitcoin from reaching its maximum price level? A, and then B, I think I know the answer to the second question of, is it preventing it from reaching its maximum growth potential?
So it's funny, I was actually doing some spelunking in the archives this morning, and I was looking at, I think there's been a lot of tension whenever I've ever presented information about Bitcoin's early economy and how it started. And I think that the modern Bitcoin, they don't like to be presented with the fact that at some point Bitcoin had no economy, and that really the first thing the Bitcoin community did was to try to create a circular economy. It did have a huge emphasis against hoarding. It had a huge emphasis on spending and getting merchants to accepting it, and really that was really the first conversation. And I think we almost have an underappreciation for that period, because it's kind of economically sort of painful to talk about. You look at these people who kind of spent exorbitant sums on little things to bootstrap the economy, but then you think about well, why were they doing that? Well, because Bitcoin wasn't money yet, right? So for most of the first year of Bitcoin's operation, it had succeeded as a technology, but it wasn't money, right? Because nobody had valued it as money. Bitcoin had no price. It didn't exists. So I've been trying to call this period of Bitcoin like the spontaneous monetization of Bitcoin. There is sort of this 0 to 1 kind of like movement of life where it's like at some point, and I was trying to calculate it earlier, and I think it's something that like, if half of all the Bitcoins were issued in the first epoch, the first 4 years, then probably something like, what's a quarter of a half? And it's the 16th. I don't know, like a 16th of the Bitcoin, maybe like an 8th to a 16th was issued without Bitcoin having any value at all, like no price, nothing, exchange for nothing. And then at that point, was Bitcoin money? And did the project even succeed? Was it even digital cash by that definition? I think the answer is no. I think really the point where Bitcoin really kind of reaches is, and this is actually the thing that separates it from most of the other alternative cryptocurrencies, is that it reached that moment on its own. Someone decided to value it for something, and that was an organic, natural market response, and it was created out of an entire movement for that economy to start, for people to start creating this Bitcoin economy. So I don't know. I think that is a movement that maybe we can go back to and draw some inspiration, because I do think that the El Salvador Bitcoin economy is important. The Bitcoin economy is important. And we need to think about how to grow and foster that, just as they did back in the day.
In your expert opinion, what?
No, I don't know about expert.
Expert. No, you are an expert on geopolitical issues here. For the sake of this question,
experts say. I think the headline of this is going to be like, experts say est3 flow.
I was just saying my mic was off, but I was saying I'm going to make t-shirts. It's going to sell them. It's going to be great.
So in Papa Pete's expert opinion, if something like El Salvador's Bitcoin attempt right now fails, or Bukele is no longer in power and they sell their Bitcoin or reverse their position, what does this have? What roadblocks does this present in the short and long term for nation state adoption versus individual adoption?
Yeah, I mean, I think obviously El Salvador was a tremendous thing that occurred, and I think we as human beings should try to make that successful, because I think that it's a tremendous vote of confidence in us that country has displayed, and I think because of that, we probably owe them some sort of moral obligation. So, is Bitcoin, there's already another country that accepts it, right? So we've already kind of, we're moving in that direction where Bitcoin is going to grow through nation state adoption, I think. But I don't know. I don't think it's specifically, it matters in so much as, like, I think we should continue to support Bitcoin economies, and we'll have to figure out how to continue supporting the Bitcoin economy. And it may be that is, that we just haven't figured that out yet. I don't think I'm answering your question very well, so I'm going to stop answering it. But, I think El Salvador, I think we should continue supporting it. And I think people should, if something negative happened in El Salvador, I think everybody would be like, it would be a big setback, right?
All right, there we go. He finally answered the question at the very end. Thank you, Pete.
Yeah, I mean, it would be upset. Like, it's a big achievement that we had, right? Like, it would suck. Like, I don't think we'd feel good about it, but it still could happen, I think, at this point, right? Like, I mean, there could be some other regime change there. I think it's still, but like, the people of El Salvador have not tremendously benefited from Bitcoin adoption in any way.
That's a fair assessment. I wonder if I know you and I have had this conversation offline, but is there an event or a nation state taking a position on Bitcoin of a certain, I'm just going to say it like this, and if I sound like an asshole for saying it, if a country that's actually legit and actually exists,
sick burn, bro,
were to come out, I mean, we saw the narrative with China banning Bitcoin, but we haven't seen the other side of that coin. We haven't seen Canada come and adopt Bitcoin or Japan come and adopt Bitcoin.
It's just too early, and I just don't think the incentives, like, Bitcoiners are all about incentive alignment, but then when you tell them, like, the incentives for something don't line up, like, it isn't, you can't really say that enough to them. It's like, yeah, the incentives don't line up for any major country to give away their monetary sovereignty, and they won't until some point that the Bitcoin economy is at such a critical mass that, like, it's detrimental for them to continue to doing what they're doing. I think El Salvador and the Central African Republic, it's like, this is happening because they want a way to advance forward. They want to leapfrog over other countries, and they're taking a tremendous chance on that. And I think that speaks to the power of the Bitcoin economy at scale. But like, you're never going to see any of those countries, especially not the United States or a developed Western country, give away its monetary privilege. I mean, I've said this before, and it's like, how do you explain to people that they no longer have Social Security when they've been paying into it for like 50 years? Like, there's just no way to, like, there's no, like, you have to think about the political risk into doing something like this. It just doesn't add up. The sad fact is that I don't know. Thankfully, I don't think we'll live to see this, but I do think the wind down of those things, if it ever gets there. But I still think there'll be like Amazon and Walmart, like Bitcoin will be the Amazon. You'll have a Walmart. You'll have some US dollar thing that, continues at that scale. That just seems obvious that would happen. I don't know why people seem to think that it just seems obvious that there would be whenever you reach, like, there's a big category disruptor, there's always like the incumbent that survives through some appropriation of technology.
But like, I think we need to separate the idea that while it's highly likely that something like that gets introduced, whether or not it's successful remains to be seen. And
I mean, one of the things I hope to see is like, there's like an America Bitcoin, but it's like the same economics as Bitcoin, but it's just branded like as an American Bitcoin. I think that would be a very popular.
Wait.
Like US.
I want to talk about this. Wait. Explain the thing. Do you mean like it's literally just Bitcoin?
Yeah, it's just the same thing, but it's like branded like America coin. And it just has like a lot of like very like grotesque, like but like, no, it is actually just functionally Bitcoin. It's like the same thing. Like,
so literally the same chain. Like literally, it's just straight Bitcoin transactions. There's no like.
It's the same like thing exactly, but it's just like rebranded. Like, I think like you're gonna see something like that where it's like hilariously non-functional. Like, there's no attempt to like outcompete on like actual technology. There's just there's the worst possible. I'm a big believer in like the worst possible outcome, like the most like the most like the most ridiculous outcome is the most likely. And I think the most ridiculous outcome is like you would just introduce some, like, look at Litecoin. I mean, Litecoin's been around for 10 years. Like, it changed like one component of Bitcoin. Like, you would just do the same thing and it would be like America Bitcoin. And honestly, I wonder like how many of the people would like opt into that.
It's going to be called Americoin.
Huh?
I mean, that's kind of what a CBDC though. But you're saying literally just Bitcoin.
Like, no, like literally just just like if you were just to like actually take, or even just a separate, like, maybe you took a set of Bitcoin and you set it up on some other network, and I don't know. Again, I'm not a technologist, so.
All right, so when you see Americoin, I hope everyone just goes after Rizzo and says, "How dare you start shitcoining?"
No, my thesis on this is I think Joe Rogers would be like a huge Americoin fan. Like, I know this is a joke that only we're gonna get, but like, I think it's like, what have you really?
No, he's gonna take it a step further. It'll be like 3D printed Bitcoin, and it'll be some like convoluted, thing. I'm here for it. But the other thing,
I think like some of these people, like when you talk to them, especially the monetary people, like, they'll go really far on a limb and they'll start talking about like, oh yeah, we just need printed bills, backed by Bitcoin, but issued by America. And it's like, okay, well, you understand like the Bitcoin technology would like likely cease to function at that point, because you have to pay the miners for like the network to, and it's like, oh, well, that'd be subsidized. And it's like, all right, well, I don't know what we're talking about anymore.
Just like things will happen. America.
Yeah, right.
I mean, I for a second, I thought you were saying that there would be like a rebrand of literally existing Bitcoin. I could totally see that.
That is what I was arguing. Yeah.
Well, but you're saying like basically like having, like a separate network. I think that
I just think you'll see all flavors of this, right? Like, I just think that, any bull market, you get these like really crazy things. And I'm actually kicking myself looking back at the last bull market. Like, why didn't I know that the top was coming in sooner? And it's just like, you look like a Jimmy Fallon with his like NFT, and then you look at like all these things, you're like, man, that was like an obvious top signal. And I kind of knew it at the time, but even then I was like, I was so unwilling to admit it to myself.
I don't know, man. I feel like you were pretty dead on, I gotta say.
I just knew when the party is over, right? I think a bull market, it's like, there's a time in every bull market where it's like, party you're at and it's like 2:30 in the morning and you're like, oh, well, I'm really going to have to commit to like staying around for this. But if I could go home now, and it's like, that it's not going to end until like 6 a.m.
Yeah.
You have to wait through the rest of that time.
Yeah. I just had this experience recently on Broadway in Nashville. It was like, everybody was like, I'm going to the next bar. And it was like, wait, fuck. Oh God. And then like, I just sort of like slunk away into the darkness, and it was a good decision. And I wish that I had.
But look, I'm excited. I mean,
I bullied him at Sound Money Fest into joining me on our adventures.
Wait, you?
Yes, I did.
I fully bullied Rizzo and like peer pressured him into taking things. And he was just like, what? No, again, right now? You want to smoke more weed?
I don't think that happened. Yeah, I don't know.
No. Rizzo's body is a temple. And,
that's true. Very true. I only exist to directionally predict the Bitcoin outcomes. Yeah.
So that's your KPI for the day. You wake up in the morning, you look at the mirror, and you're like, did you directionally predict the price of Bitcoin?
I just think people mostly convince themselves into thinking that this is hard, right? I think at the end of the day, like, like people are, when everyone's happy, usually things are gonna turn around eventually. And then when everybody's in despair, usually things will correct, right? So it's, I think the longer you're in the market, you just get better at recognizing like euphoria and despair, right? So like right now, we're not at despair. I think we got punched in the gut. And like, but we're not at despair. There's going to be a despair / just, everybody will stop caring, right? We're not at that point yet. And then when everybody stops caring, things will reset, right? So there's just I think my point to it is like, there's just a natural cycle to Bitcoin because Bitcoin is programmatic, right? Like it has to. And human psychology is malleable. So it seems like, again, like we're dealing with like the collision of Bitcoin, which is like a known mathematical program, with messier elements like national economies or like human psychology. And we don't know how these things are going to interact. But we are learning about that, right? So it's not totally a waste of time, right?
Interesting. I have an important question for you. I'm curious to get your sort of editorial sense on this because you've been in the space for a long time and you've talked with so many people and I feel like you have this sort of encyclopedic knowledge of what's happened so far. So the question is, marry, fuck, kill, Christine Lagarde, Janet Yellen, or Jerome Powell.
I guess I don't know enough about their personalities, and at the end of the day.
What?
I'm just I'm a sucker. I'm a sucker for a good personality. At the end of the day, it's hard to tell.
It was an elegant dodge, my friend.
I mean, if it's on looks alone, I mean, we can proceed, but
whatever qualifications you want. This is about you and your personal beliefs as it relates to Bitcoin.
I try not to worry myself with the traditional markets. It's outside of our control. I don't even know. I struggle to pay attention to these things, to be honest, right? I know people like talking about the Fed and Bitcoin against the Fed, but we really just we're building our own alternative to this stuff, I don't know.
Fair enough.
Have other people answered that question? Like, what's the popular answer to that question?
American Model had so far the best answer.
What was that?
To marry Papa Powell so that you could just have access to that money printer.
Okay, that's fair.
I don't even remember what the rest of the answer is.
I don't want to think about the rest of any of that. I knew that was coming. That's why in the chat I said, don't do it.
I mean, it's a provocative question, right? I guess fuck all of them, right? That's the.
Ooh, I like that answer. I like it. All right.
So Pete Rizzo's into orgies established.
High quality channeling.
Yeah. All right. Serious. On a more serious note, why is the market bottom not in until Gary V goes bankrupt?
Yeah, I don't know. I don't. Logan Paul went bankrupt, right? So that's.
Oh shit!
Is he bankrupt or like is one of his side businesses declaring bankruptcy?
Yeah, hard to say. I mean, again, I think the bottom is in when nobody's talking about it anymore, right? Historically, I think people are trying to like convince themselves we're at the end, and it's, for me, it's like more when you see it, right? People are still at least interested in the price going down, which would say that they're at least interested in Bitcoin. But I think the apathy is the real bottom, right? And then the question is, how do you get out of the apathy, and what do you build back, right? Like what can you grab on to though in those times, and like how do you move forward, right? So I think that that's what I'm excited to see happen, right? I think that we've seen the end of a lot of cycles and saw a lot of narratives that have driven the last cycle, and I think we've gotten what we can learn out of them. But like I'm excited for people to like introduce new things, right? Like what are we going to learn about Bitcoin over the next 3 or 4 years, and how is our thinking going to evolve? And if like that's not something you're interested in, like then Bitcoin's probably not going to be your thing, right? Like that's that is the conversation, this understanding, this learning about what Bitcoin is. Like that is the process. That is what Bitcoin is, right? I was trying to learn how to advance it. So yeah, I'm excited to see what happens. I have some inclinations, but I can't really say, right? I think the last cycle, it was a lot about economics, right? They really delved really deeply into traditional economics, like and how it worked and how Bitcoin, fit the Austrian money perspective and all the benefits and pros and cons of that. I feel like we're at the end of that. That doesn't feel like something that we need to continue learning about to me. I feel like we've kind of hit the peak of that. So I think there's an opportunity for somebody to kind of move in, and for other people to give some new direction. So hoping that we see that.
So, serious question. I think that I came into Bitcoin in 2016, 2017, and learning about the kind of earlier history and everything that happened was a process for me. And I feel like one of the things that is so interesting to me in this space is that there aren't many resources that really go through and describe effectively the psychology in the moments, the various trends.
Oh, there's none. I was talking to some from like 2013 at a conference recently, and it's like, I guarantee you, if you as a 2022 Bitcoiner, if you walked into a room at like an old Bitcoin conference, like I honestly don't even know if you would know it was the same thing. Like if you would even be able to identify that you were in the same place. Like I don't even know if that's possible. Yeah, I mean, I just somebody was telling me the other day that they watched Banking on Bitcoin, and I was like, why did you watch Banking on Bitcoin? I was like, that's that was a big documentary during the first 2013 bubble, and it's like you go through the people who were in that documentary, and it's like Roger Ver, Gavin and Rizzo, just like all the people from like the first years of Bitcoin, and you look at them now and sort of their market position, and it's like, yeah, it's totally divergent, right? Yeah, so I think it's unfortunately something that I think you can only see with time, and that's why I think when I saw last cycle people were getting so locked in to like this bubble, like it's happening, I'm here, it like needs to happen now because like I'm special. Like that's the psychology that happens. And it's like the right reaction to it is like, part of this is probably valuable. Like there's a part of the underlying thesis here that is, if you're building your mental model of Bitcoin, something that you'll take going forward, and then like 60% of it is just totally worthless junk, right? Like in each of the periods of Bitcoin. But yeah, it was totally different. And again, almost unrecognizable, and that's why I think you see such a churn of people, right? I don't know. I've tried to describe this phenomenon again as like part of the cyclical nature of Bitcoin, and this is, I think, another thing that supports it is like Bitcoin has this like eternal spring, like during bull markets, where it's like all of a sudden it's like everything is being recreated again, like all history is condensed. And I wonder if it's like almost a good thing. It's almost like a defense mechanism for the Bitcoin system. It's like every time it like has a huge like price momentum upward, it's like it's almost as if the whole thing is being recreated in that moment, and any prior history about it is like irrelevant, right? And there's like a nice quality to that, in that those people who are driving it forward at that time, they get to just ignore like everything that had ever happened, and it's happening right now, and everything that we're talking about is so important and like so 100% truthful about what is happening. And yeah, I don't know. It's like it's a weird phenomenon to watch because like especially having watched it multiple times, it's like that it's not going to work out well for those people. Like they're not. And like again, the only thing that I want to see is like I want to see people stick around with Bitcoin for multiple cycles because I went into Bitcoin with fairly loose convictions. I built up some convictions, but I know Bitcoin can be very tough with people on convictions. Like you look at somebody like a Roger Ver and you ask like, well, why does he hate Bitcoin so much? Well, it's, he was a person with very strong convictions. Then Bitcoin no longer shares those convictions, so he's elsewhere, right? So yeah, I think if you've stuck it out this far as a new person in the 2021 22 market, I hope that you will contribute and you will find a way, to move forward after, realizing that a lot of the stuff that we've been talking about is not very valuable.
So here's my question for you. I think that, what was it? Goethe who said like, he can draw on 3,000 years history is living from hand to mouth. I feel like that's the same thing, but in the Bitcoin ecosystem. And you seem uniquely positioned to create or to orchestrate this history of Bitcoin, which I think would help achieve the goal that you just mentioned, right?
Would it though, or would you reduce that process? Would you kill the eternal spring? It is the eternal spring itself, so like a value.
Interesting.
It's like is the eternal spring like actually a defense mechanism of Bitcoin because it creates the conditions under which the euphoria happens, right? Like the euphoria is a product of the nowness of it. Again, I'm like using words here that are like totally nonsensical, and I'm sure like none of this will hold up. But again, I very struggle to like define like having witnessed like multiple. Again, it's like Bitcoin sort of metastasizes into certain cultures, and the cultures sort of convince themselves that they're correct because of the price movements, when really they're separate phenomena. It's like, and again, it's like everybody in the crypto market is doing that. So it's like everyone who's saying anything in the market, the price going up affirms their belief in that thing. So it's like, it's a very weird, disturbing social phenomena. And I think that, when you talk about like, okay, like why do no corners like react so viscerally negatively to that? And it's like, well, yeah, obviously that's an insane thing like to watch, right? There's no way for all of those people to be right. And they all seem equally insane. But they're all at the same time trying to describe the phenomena, right? The NFT guy is trying, like all these people are trying to describe the same thing, right? They're to the extent that they're like well represented logical actors, like acting authentically, right? They're trying, they're aspirationally to like okay, so this is a good quote that I at one time, it's like reality is just descriptions of the truth that are change resistant, right? I thought that was an interesting way to prove it. So it's like whatever descriptions of reality are most change resistant is truth. I thought that was a really interesting way to look at it. And I do think at the end of the day, the idea that Bitcoin is working and that it's cyclical and that it's not going to zero, like is a more change resistant description of reality than the idea that Bitcoin is going to zero and it's worthless. And so therefore it is more correct. It is correct because it is a more change resistant description of reality than the no corner version, right? Which when you evaluate it on those terms, is not change resistant, right? Does that make sense? Anyway, I thought it was an interesting way to look at it.
No, it definitely does. It's fascinating.
Right. And it also says something really interesting about truth, which is that it's like everyone in the like truth is almost a market for information. And like everyone is like entering claims in that market about what truth is. And then the market will just invalidate a lot of them. Right. So it is specifically those descriptions that are change resistant that is truth. Right. So when you evaluate the fields, my argument would be like Bitcoiners have the most change resistant description of reality. Right. That we have an understanding of our economy, an understanding of our values, that Bitcoin is cyclical, Bitcoin is not going to zero, it's working as an economic system. And then you compare that value set to like what the no corners, how the no corners describe it, and then how the cryptocurrency folks describe it. And it's precisely like those three descriptions of realities that are in conflict, and like one of them has to be correct.
That's so interesting. That's I'm gonna have to think about that one.
Because one of them has to be more change resistant.
Yeah. It's almost like in it's slightly different, but in like behavioral ecology and evolution, you talk about the organisms that are the best, like evolution doesn't push us towards being the best possible organism. People have this misconception that evolution is like, it just always leads to the best outcome, but it doesn't. It leads to the combination of, genotype, phenotype, group selection, all these things that are best adapted to survive given the specific environmental conditions that they're in. And as soon as that environment changes, then it creates a situation where another, like, previously unsuccessful niche basically comes to fruition and is the one, and animals that have adapted to that niche succeed. I feel like there's some kind of parallels between what you were saying and that idea.
Yeah, that is interesting. Yeah, I think I'm not sure how to square those. I have to spend some time thinking of them. I think that reality is also like an evolutionary process, right? I think that's probably the lesson there, and it does exist to drive towards outcomes, but then the conditions in which that is happening can also change, right? Like if you were a dinosaur, like you were well adapted to your environment until there was an ice age. So again, so that's a good example, because I think the current fiat ecosystem is likely a well-adapted creature to its current environment. It just does not realize that by virtue of Bitcoin existing, the environment has changed. And it will never rationalize that. Like, it has no ability to. But again, I do think it'll be a very long, timeline towards that playing out, right?
Yeah. Well, Pete, I want to be respectful of your time. I know that. How are you doing on time? Can we keep going? Can we keep picking your brain, or do you have to?
Sure, we can do another. I got a hard stop at 3. We can do another. There's some great questions in this chat about HZM coin.
I mean, look, you tried to give us a shortened slot, so that was on you.
I know. I hear you. I'll tell the people at Bloomberg who wanted to talk about B2Z Inc. and all the things that are going on there.
Well, I'm actually more curious if you can, being the historian you are.
Am I?
Oh.
Yes, 100%.
I'm putting you on the spot because it is now with full confidence I'm going to ask this question, because Pete Rizzo does know the answer to it, but who is Satoshi Nakamoto?
Satoshi is all of us, man. He's Jerome Powell. He's P, the podcaster.
Oh my gosh, Satoshi being Jerome Powell
is the life force. Yeah,
that is the plot twist of the century.
Yeah. I don't know. I mean, again, I keep going back and forth. I don't know that we need to know who Satoshi is, because we know so much about the contextual world that he operated in. To understand his motivations, and assumptions. Where it's almost not particularly valuable. I always say that this is pretty overstated. You can go back to historical inventions. It's do you know who invented the wheel? Well, it's no. Is the wheel incredibly useful? Sure.
Also, no.
No,
it was wrong. Was the other one? That was the right answer.
Yeah. Well, if you don't believe in the wheel, I don't know.
So then let me.
Oh, I do have a new thing. Actually, I'll give you a new bit that I've been working on.
Okay.
But if you go back to other points in technology history, so there's this one example, the electric man. So I don't know if in the World's Fair of the 1900s, there was one famous kind of thing they debuted, and they debuted this concept of the electric man, which is the future, because they were really hyped about electricity, right? They were super bullish on the long term, everything being electricity.
There are no cycles in electricity. We're going up forever, Laura.
Yeah, right. The electricity bag holders were they were super charged up, right? So yeah, I think that there's a phenomenon in any technology where your descriptions of the future is so is it directionally correct that so right now I'm surrounded by electricity, having this conversation with you guys who are also surrounded by electricity, but we are not ourselves robot people powered by electricity, right? So there's this weird delta with new technology where it's we have to try to describe the future, and our descriptions of it are not going to be correct because we can't actually conceive of what the reality will be like. But we have to keep trying, right? We have to. The only thing we can do is to keep making that. So the electric man is a funny one because it's so ridiculous. If you go back and look at the pictures of the electric man that they tried out, it's just a blade. He has radio antenna heads and whatever, right?
Wait, but what was it? Can you describe the electric man for us, or the idea behind it?
You've seen them. It's just it's the robot with the big cylindrical body, and then it gets up and it's like, and it has the radio between their heads. But it's the 1900s, right? They didn't know, right? But there are all sorts of different concepts like this. There's like the flying cities, right? Like they thought that they would have hot air balloon cities, like right before they figured out flight. They would have big balloons, and then people would live out. So nobody thought about how to get food back and forth to the balloons, or like how people would travel.
Electricity
right?
will solve that problem.
Yeah, it was just like a foregone conclusion that people would live in balloon cities, and like obviously that's not true, right?
Got it.
Well, there's like technology fetishism, right? So like people have to, whenever a new technology comes out, we don't understand it. And so there is this like tremendous creativity that comes out that's like we as humans like apply our creativity to trying to explain this future. And then in retrospect, like our versions of this future are always really hilarious or like incorrect, right? But they're actually not so incorrect, right? Because again, if you like think about the Electric Man kind of analogy, it's like, we currently, are doing things that like you would describe in that way, right? But like they had no way to visually represent it, and they didn't have any idea of what it would be, right? So I think that like a lot of what things we're saying about Bitcoin are like Electric Man type straw mans, right? They're just, the future will
fantasies that get anchored in people's minds and then get sort of propagated to a ridiculous degree.
Yeah, right. Like so outrageous they could never be possible. But then the reality is that their description of reality is like more correct, right? So if you say the guy making the Electric Man proposal, and then the skeptic in the crowd who was like, with his monocle and his like top hat, being like, "Bah, there'd never be an Electric Man." It's like
Steve Powell is the answer, obviously.
The grandfather of Jerome Powell. Whose description of reality was more change resistant? Well, the Electric Man guy, right? But he wasn't 100% correct, right?
I like
that. Interesting about the balloon people, because I don't know. I feel like their description of reality was like pretty wrong.
Balloon
That's not
world
what
is still...
Bioshock Infinity would suggest. I mean, as I understand it was a documentary game. You don't know what I'm talking about, do you, Rizzo?
No, I don't know what you're talking about at all. I love balloon stuff, though. I love like old balloon art. Like it's pretty funny.
Oh, we got to have a conversation about Bioshock.
It was called aeronautics, I think, right? It was prior to aviation. It was aeronautics, right?
Yep, and there were going to be ergonauts that were like balloon men that traveled all over the world, and
and the helium balloons and everything. Yeah.
Although there's a whole conspiracy theory about Zeppelin technology that it's being held down by the big gas because like
gas, right? Okay.
Zeppelins are the efficient ways to who the fuck knows.
Bring them back, maybe that's the way to get from Citadel to Citadel. We just So I guess helium is sort of running out these days, right?
Hey man, honestly, based on what you just said, Rizzo, I don't even think you believe in Bitcoin Citadels. So
well, I mean, again, I like maybe there's some, right? Like, so the Bitcoin Citadel description, like maybe there is some truth to that, but like then you also won't live in a castle like on a hill, but like your house or digital environment will be such that you are like enclosed off and you have that relationship to the world that like, so again, like it's like maybe the expression is like genuine, it's the visualization and the articulation of it that is like that is the ridiculous part, right? So maybe the correct manifestation as the Citadel is that digital information like will not propagate into your digital space like within the boundaries of the construct we're using in Citadel, but you won't live in a castle with armed guards, maybe.
No,
sorry,
of course not. We'll be guarded by Electric Men, obviously.
right, yeah. Yep. Yep. Fun times. Well, I look forward to visiting you guys.
Yeah, come through, man. This was an incredible conversation. I know you're super busy.
Wait, there's one more question. There's one.
You gotta sell. You gotta get rid of it all. So you gotta sell the Goldman.
Now, what is your end of year price prediction?
You
have to give me a number. You don't get to.
We're more uncomfortable answering this than the question that I asked you earlier about Mary Felt Kill. So.
I think that next year will be a off year for Bitcoin, which not very many people are excited about it. And that's okay. We'll persevere and we'll continue to grow and build the Bitcoin economy. And then I think the year after that will be a good year for Bitcoin. And I think the year after that will be a good year for Bitcoin. But then I think the year after that will be bad for Bitcoin. And also the year after that. And then the year after that will be a good year for Bitcoin. And then the other year after that will be a good year for Bitcoin. So like
it's almost like there's a pattern that you're
like a cycle. It sounds almost cyclical in nature.
It's possible, right? Yeah. I mean, I guess maybe if there's, if there's a year where just no one feels anything, we don't feel at all. Maybe that would break the cycle.
Oh God.
Like there's no euphoria and no despair. It's just,
just nothing.
All right. Well, you heard it from the perma bear. Rizzo, let everyone know where they could keep up to date with everything you do and how they could keep up to date with your trading technique and your latest Bitcoin trades.
Well, trading techniques, you got to work for Bitcoin Magazine. You got to be in the Slack channels. I think that's that's the only time those are getting out. But yeah, I tweet on Twitter at Pete_Rizzo. I try to tweet things about Bitcoin history that are interesting. Also editor at large for Kraken Cryptocurrency Exchange, and doing Bitcoin Magazine things. Hoping to be writing more in the future. So go Electric Men.
Give Papa Pete a follow. I'm debating if I want to do the announcement right now or when we come back from a commercial break.
What's the announcement?
I think Pete's going to get really mad.
All right. See you guys later. Bye.
All right. We'll do the announcement and then we'll cut to a quick commercial break. As we have told you time and time again, tickets for Bitcoin 2023 are on sale. Ticket prices are going up next week, but I heard all of you guys crying. I heard all the begging on DMs. It's too expensive, man. Even still. Well, ticket prices go up next Friday, so I don't know what to tell you, but I went to the ticket people, to the ticket cods, and I did it for you, the lowly pleb who needed a discount. And you can use promo code BMLive to get 10% off of your Bitcoin 2023 tickets now. So I did this for you, the plebs. These ticket prices are going to go up next Friday. So you have a very short window to capitalize on this. But promo code BMLive is now active. So feel free to get 10% off of your Bitcoin 2023 conference tickets using the promo code BMLive. Don't ever use the promo code FOMO for anything. Jesus. DM me for promo codes.
All right, my friends. That's a rip. We're going to go to commercial break. We'll come back. We got the incredible group from Bitcoin Magazine Pro. We'll be talking about the price, the markets, and everything in between. We'll see you in a sec.